And we are live. Hello, everyone. I am Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew, and with me today we have Georgia Liberty, the Wiccan Conservative, and we are going to be talking about uh, storytelling today. Witches weaving the world. Yeah, we're
The
okay,
word
gang.
of the world.
That's what we're doing. I've been having to have a lot of cough drops, gangs, to make my voice halfway decent. So any of my verbal slippages today, it's the medicine's fault. But George is here to help me out. And the reason why we're focusing on this is because at Blackbird's Brew, we have been reviving the tradition of oral storytelling. Just last night, a group of us got together. It was share a favorite myth or a myth that you found interesting and starting to peel back the layers. And as I got thinking about it more and more this morning, I thought if you really want to have a gauge about what people actually believe, what they really think, and how they really feel, and how they view the world, you're going to find your insight of that through the stories that they love. So that was my first thought. Georgia, you tell the people what general direction your thoughts have been taking you on this subject.
Last night I really have to give a shout out to everybody that showed up and actually everybody shared stories, which was amazing. And it was so interesting, not only to get their perspective on the story, but the way that they told the story. You could tell which parts really caught their attention, what the story meant to them, and then dissecting it afterward had such a old world charm to it that felt so natural and so unique. And what we found, I think, after everybody started kind of giving their perspective of what spoke to them during this time of the year, we actually started to see a theme emerge, not only in just the stories that we were telling, but the overarching idea that we were telling the stories at all. We weren't really necessarily the characters of the story. We weren't painting ourselves in those positions at all, but we were receiving the messages of the stories and relating them back to our own struggles and our own perspectives on what we thought the characters could do or should do, or what they were positioned to do in the beginning of the story and ultimately how it ended, because we did, the Greek mythology, we did, the Norse pantheon, we did, the Puritan view came on and did the Native American story. So we had so many different cultures brought to the table, and we were all able to connect with that. I think that was something so special that we needed to not only just talk about in our own group, but we had to bring it to the people. And that's exactly why we got to spitballing this morning and decided that we were just going to come in and weave a tale. See, you're rubbing off on me. Weave a tale for the world.
And I have to give Puritan View a lot of credit for that, because the story she brought to us about the Native American who ended up becoming the storyteller for his tribe, and suddenly all the warriors who, suddenly hadn't taken him seriously in his, earlier in his life, suddenly they wanted to talk to him because he was going to be the one who preserved their deeds. He was the tribe's memory. And I got to thinking about how, that is a very important role for witches in particular to fulfill. We need to be the perpetuators of all of the stories. I mean, how can you have the craft of the wise if you don't thoroughly know and are grounded in the stories that are supposed to help you become wise to start with? And just for pagans in general, I mean, we are the stories that we tell each other. You can tell a lot about a civilization, about their folk tales and what's in popular culture, because it isn't just the ancient mythologies that speak to us on this deep human level. Every so often, in spite of Hollywood's best efforts, someone actually produces something good, and it speaks to people, and it just seeps into them, and they can't get over it, because it is just saying something about existence itself. I mean, Lord of the Rings, I would throw out as a prime example of that. I mean, I have not heard anyone from a single background or religion who did not find a way to fall in love with that story.
Indeed. And, it touched a lot of different people through different media sources as well. And I think that since we're transitioning everything into a more technologically based world, it is only part of the natural progression to start talking about the importance of conveying these stories, not only on such an overproduced Hollywood sort
Mm-hmm.
of level, but also, like you said, bringing it back to the people exchanging their ideas and their thoughts together on an independent basis. Now, the story that Puritan View told us was absolutely encapsulating of the entire overarching
Mm-hmm.
feeling that we ended up getting at the end of the day. But I liked a Star's approach where
Mm-hmm.
she kind of peppered in her own thoughts and ideas, not that it changed the story or the outcome of the moral of the story, but it gave the unique dynamic of I absorbed this material from multiple different sources, and based upon somewhere in between, this is what I believe is a more accurate representation for something that I can relate to. Now, the interesting thing about that is I think that's how we ended up with a lot of different pantheons and a lot of different mythologies going through the course of human history, because it was such an oral tradition. And Styx Hexenhammer actually was talking about this in his past couple mystic videos that he was doing aside from politics as well, where he talks a lot about the intertwinement of these ideas and ultimate ethics and morals and values that come from different sources but lead you to the same conclusions. So if you are a natural talent, I believe this is one of the things that he said, and you're composing music by ear, does that necessarily make you a better musician than somebody who had to learn from a sheet and actually take up the technicalities of learning where the notes fall on the scale and coordinating them with the instrument that they are attempting to play? No, if the music is just as beautiful and reaches the same conclusion, then I think that the method is almost irrelevant as long as the end is the same. What do you think?
Well, I'm actually very glad you brought that up because we know there are different ways to travel to get to the same conclusion. And I like this idea of people working with their innate wiring. Sometimes people do have that more left brain, very analytical. I'm going to take this step by step kind of approach. And then other people are more right brained and it's just, I'm going to fall into this and it'll all swirl together and it'll be gorgeous. Trust me. I'm just going with my instincts. And both approaches can really result in very good things. And I think we also need to allow ourselves the freedom to experiment because I don't think that we necessarily know ourselves as well as we think we do. Even with all of the meditation we do and the dream work and this and that and all of the analyzing and looking at our patterns of behavior, there are still chapters within our souls that we know nothing about. And sometimes it's through this exploration and through the exploration of story that we start to find these particular attributes, like with characters. Sometimes we are, reading or watching a story or listening to one, and there's a particular character, and it's like we just bond with them. And
Mm.
sometimes it's because there's an aspect of them that's mirrored within ourselves that perhaps we didn't realize or we weren't comfortable with. But now it's there and you feel exposed. And what are you going to do with that now? Because you can't unknow it. And then other times, I think sometimes we're seeing our opposites of I see in this character everything that I'm not, and maybe I would like to be, or maybe I could benefit from the lessons that this teaches. And from there, at least my brain goes to who do I know in the rest of life who also mirrors those attributes? Because maybe I should be paying closer attention to them and what they have to say in their perspective. Because I do think that stories are the way that I think it's really the primary way that divine beings and divine energy interacts with human beings. I think this is
Mm.
our method of communication. So, taking stories a bit more seriously and trying to relate them back to our lives, I think this is a necessary next step of our evolution.
Yeah, I think that not only would we benefit more as society to take these things to heart, we wouldn't be so quick to throw them away and use
Yeah.
them for pure entertainment. And, that kind of leads me down into the second tangent that we both kind of want to touch on with this is that we're speaking a lot about the fictional things and how we can express ourselves and uses of creativity and using that to gain a fulfillment in life. But speaking to those analytical sided people, there is a technical aspect to the storytelling as well. We're talking about accurately documenting history and events and certain things that are happening, maybe not necessarily in just your family, but also in your communities and how things are being handed down historically from society to society, because when we think back to the stories that our grandparents were to tell us, it was very family centric. I think
Hmm.
it was very focused on, well, it was our family that had to trudge through this and trudge through that, and there's not a lot of bonding in those stories. So you grow up with a lot of real concepts of what you and your family struggled with, but you forget that there were people in the communities living mirroring lives, that they were going through the same struggles, that your story may not be as unique to yourself as you think it is. It is a minor change of characters. It is a minor plot twist here or there, but essentially it's the same story. So, how do we take those truths that we know happen to everybody and effectively communicate that to the next generation so that they can ponder upon our issues for themselves prior to them becoming issues in their lives? We do talk a lot about how these things are going to affect our morality and our ethics. And yeah, it's great to base fictional thoughts and characters on those types of idealistic values. But would it be more beneficial if we were more honest about a societal story?
I'm very glad you brought that up because some of my favorite stories are where they show the complexities of societies, and that has actually helped me understand our own mythologies a lot better. Because when you are presenting people, not necessarily if here are the good guys and here are the villains, rather you say here are people who have these specific set of interests, these specific set of goals, and here are people who have conflicting interests and conflicting goals. Now we can get into perhaps morality as far as methodology, but I think we can also get to a much more truthful human form of storytelling when we say people are willing to go to these lengths if they think the stakes are this high and if they think that it matters for them to do X, Y, and Z. The better seasons of Game of Thrones did an outstanding job. We're not going to talk. We're talking seasons 1 through 4. We're not talking about the rest. I'm not dealing with that. But the seasons 1 through 4, you saw the humanity, even in the characters who you didn't necessarily respect and you weren't meant to like. Even amongst the characters who you knew that even if they weren't in conflict right then, they were on the pathway to be in very serious conflicts down the road. But it felt different. It didn't feel like you were being told to change sides. It was more so understand how these things happen. And I
Mm.
think that's something we desperately need. We need to have stories that can tell us how we get from point A to point B that ends up with result C. Because if there's one thing that's been disconnected in people's minds, it's cause and effect, action and consequence. So the more our stories reinforce that, I think the better off we are. But in addition to this, one of the tropes that's thrown out is that, oh, facts don't care about your feelings, and the reply is the feelings don't care about your facts. And we've been stuck at this impasse. And it occurred to me as you were talking earlier that I think maybe storytelling is the way to communicate truths, to communicate principles, to where people of both mindsets are able to hear you without immediately shutting you down. What do you think?
Yeah, it goes a very long way. And I think that's why we communicate so well with anecdotes and little quibs and poems and things like that get stuck in our brains, and how we become easily manipulated by those things as
Yeah.
well. Because if it's catchy and it sticks in your brain, it could be a completely false story, but it touched you in your feely parts, or it touched you in your analytical part where you just can't let it go. And, a lot of people have a hard time dictating reality from fiction
Hmm.
when they are surrounded by too much fiction.
Yeah.
So, like you said, the framing of these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and not allowing people to decide for themselves. Like you said, not you have to pick the good guy's side, or if you pick the bad guy's side, then you're just the antithesis of this motion, or you're just trying to be resistant to the good guys. I think that's detrimental, and it pits people um, against each other before they even have a chance to hit neutral ground. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, it does. And it prevents them from seeing things in the term of any kind of nuance. Now, there are times, as you know, our dear Amanda, she likes things to be black and white. And there are times when it is literally black and white. But, for the majority of the time, there's stuff, and we have to take it into account. And I want to say hello to Marcus. Thank you for joining us, sweetie. He said that it's a great way to plant seeds in people's minds. I agree. I agree, particularly if you can create compelling characters who are doing things that people admire, and they're doing it out of some sense of purity. They're not doing it for, all the wrong reasons, because I don't know if this is an accurate perception, so tell me if this matches up with you at all. But I do feel like we are seeing the beginning of people having a hunger for something that is sincere. They just want to know what's real. They just want to have something that's solid. Whether they like it or hate it, they just want to know what it is. I think they're getting a little bit tired of the really toxic form of make believes that are so prevalent right now.
They've seen the effects. It's been in the works long enough now that we're seeing the effects that it does have on reality, because it, we are now experiencing the generations who don't have, and I'm going to be again really childish here, the Bugs Bunny cartoons. Okay, let's be realistic here. Those cartoons were wartime propaganda that if you
Mhm.
watch them with any type of objectiveness, not just entertainment value, but if you observe the messaging and what was going on, it tells a story about a point in time where this was the narrative, this is what was going on. And we used to get certain historical facts because, yes, it was comedy, but there were historical accuracies intertwined into that comedy where you could go, yes, this is, in regards to that aircraft that the American military flew at the time, or yes, this is the actual battle that they were fighting on the ground, or even just the propaganda piece in general that they had to bring American support to the war effort through comedy and through these things.
Mhm.
So, we don't have the generations going back and showing the children when they hit a certain age that, okay, yeah, it was fun and it was classical music. It exposed them to historical things that, even in my head, I look back and I'm like, I only know that because of Bugs Bunny, or I only heard that composer because it was on Looney Tunes, and I'm like, but those sorts of things sparked my interest in finding out about, classical composers and wartime efforts and why they created those cartoons. And it was because of those stories that I was told by the family members and things like that. But we don't have that anymore. You have a completely made up mythological existence to reality. Now, in some cases, yeah, that's great as an escape, but to live there
Mhm.
permanently is a very dangerous thing. And we see these kids that come up. I mean, how many How many of these, I just saw this carjacking being blamed on Grand Theft Auto again. How many times have we tried to pull that narrative that the video games and the books and these things are influencing the children, but other people want to say, no, 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 it's up to, this person or that person. No, I think it's up to all of us, to be collaborative and state where things belong, what the perspective of those things need to be. And like you said, have your fiction, but explain fiction and nonfiction in such a way that you can separate the two.
That, and learn the right lesson from it. Some of the
Yes.
most outrageous thing in fiction, it's you are there, you are seeing the train wreck in excruciating detail, and it's there to say, that's why you don't. That's what's laying at the end of that particular road. That's why you don't want to go that route. I mean, and to bring up Lord of the Rings, when he's looking into Frodo is looking into the mirror, seeing what will happen to the Shire if he doesn't succeed in destroying the ring. That was to essentially stiffen his resolve of saying, you don't want to go here. You don't want this to be the outcome. You don't want your friends and your family to suffer the way they will inevitably suffer if you fail. And I think we also kind of need that, that right kind of lesson inside of our heads of, I know where a really bad chain of events leads to. I see it in history. I see it echoed in fiction. So apparently there is some kind of human truth about this chain of events, and I need to take hold of myself and not be a participant in that, or to pull away from it, or at least get out of its way. I think that's a huge thing that we could benefit from learning from.
But that's where we flipped it upside down. They no longer, have those logical conclusions. And this is, I think where people have gotten bored with, again, human nature, to the point where they felt they had to shake things up, or they had to kind of flip the script, so it's called, or put a twist into the story, where your stories are not leading to the logical conclusions, or they're building up characters that are infallible, that you cannot touch them, that they're set to constantly succeed. There's no strife or actual conflict. I mean, they make up conflict, and then their catch-all kind of cleans everything up for them so that their protagonist can succeed with whatever it is the storyline is. And a lot of people are coming away from modern stories not feeling any attachment at all to it. They're not relating to it in a meaningful way. Not anybody that's put serious time on this earth, but what they are reaching are the children who have the imagination still, who can exist in that fantasy world without consequence, until the point where it does become a consequence for them. And then these kids are growing up, and we see what's happening when reality finally hits them. And it pains me, because again, we are not talking to our children or ourselves on a level where we're getting an actual story to have a meaningful effect on somebody. We aren't even telling the stories of the people who are doing real work for their society or for their communities, or things like that. Independent journalists get knocked all the time for wanting to do pet projects, or not hopping on the mainstream bandwagon, whatever that is. Splitting the view time between massive conglomerates and small time contributors, and then having everybody on this scale, it detriments us as a society to tell these toxic tales in such a way that you erode the free thinking of the next generation, in my opinion.
The free thinking, and also the ability to draw things to a logical conclusion. And I think this applies in both fiction and nonfiction, because for our generation, if we see characters acting in a way that doesn't make sense for the character, or that has not, their journey through the story, the groundwork is just not working for us, we don't believe it. We instinctively reject it. And I think you're right. We're not doing a good enough job of explaining to the kids of, okay, mommy or auntie didn't really like that story because this didn't make sense. And this is why it didn't make sense. Oh, and you saw the people they got together in that story. Let me tell you why that does not work in reality, because, oh boy, here's the problems those characters would have if we fast forwarded 20 years in the future. And what's funny is that sometimes in these stories, they do have the wrong pairs get together, and then they do a sequel, and you see what's going on with their kids, and the kids are talking about how they grew up. And it amazes me because sometimes the writers are honest enough to where they showcase that the parents did have these problems that you knew they were going to have, but they're still trying to pound you over the head like, no, they were meant to be. This is how it is supposed to be. And like, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's
Right.
a train wreck, and you're trying to put a Band-Aid with flowers on it.
It exposes writers, though, real
Oh,
quick before
yeah.
you go on, because to be in that world, you have to live in that world yourself. If you're creating it, you've got to start thinking, like you said, in that world perspective and how things are actually supposed to logistically work. Now, when you go willy-nilly like that and you're off the chain, you're right. That's the first way to go, no, this is not for me.
Yeah. Oh, I tell you what, it has prevented some good series from becoming great series. It has prevented them from reaching immortality, which is sad because mythology shouldn't just be something we have in our past. We should be constantly creating it, because we don't know what sometimes some of the characters of the storylines, if whether or not there was a little divine nudge here and there, and there's a reason why it's striking such a chord in us. And when
Well, who
things,
becomes the real heroes? Like I said,
yeah,
when's the last time that we actually, as a society, decided that, you know what, we're going to write about this person? This
yeah.
person is out here doing great things, and while the world is crashing and burning around us, we're going to write the stories of the things that they have accomplished, so that at least it's analoged in history. We
Hmm.
have it on record. What happens from there depends on the respect that we give for that piece of documentation to the next generation. So, like I said, even looking at our own history and what we've chosen to reiterate, destroy, rewrite, whatever, it makes me wonder, like you said, if we don't move into the future worshiping nothing but false, unattainable idols.
Hmm. I mean, we can't exist that way. I mean, that's one of the things that I've pointed out to some of our Christian brethren. The fact that our gods have flaws in the story, that isn't a reflection on the gods. It's a reflection on reality. They're just being honest. They're saying, yes, this is a process. Life does not come with an instruction book. We're letting you see our mistakes so you don't have to make the same dumb things that we did when we were younger. There's a reason why we give you the nudges that we give you, gang. Just saying. And
Truth.
as far as heroes, I mean, whether in fiction or in real life, I feel like there's a real resistance to having anyone who's actually admirable, because the people who, we might be inclined to admire, everyone's trying to trash them, oftentimes without any cause. And that is incredibly detrimental, because it's telling people, yeah, you don't want to better yourself. You don't want to become the best version of you are, whatever that is, because the better version of you are, the more flack you're going to get. And since we haven't exactly taught people the value of endurance and how making sacrifices is sometimes a necessity, we have not equipped ourselves or the children to get through those tough times and say it is still worth it to fully become and to fully inhabit the best of your traits that you are able to have, and to try to strive for that and operate on that basis. The intentional destruction of the heroic, I think that's an attack on civilization itself.
Yeah, and it really does warp the mindset now, doesn't it? Especially because I think it's so funny that people are so quick to say, "Oh yeah, mythology is flawed, and look at all these terrible things, and la 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 la, all this stuff." It not only does it highlight human nature, but it also shows some of the more unsightly choices that you might have to make.
Mm-hmm.
And again, brings you to a point where you're more relatable. You don't expose these flaws because you hate somebody and you want to tear them down. You expose the flaws so that you can show you are a relatable person, and to show that whoever is reading or indulging in the tale, they're not alone. and
Mm-hmm.
and that's the most, I believe, sensitive, if you want to, topic for people to come to terms with, is everybody wants to feel like they're not alone in the
Yeah.
universe. When we tell tales to each other, not only fiction but nonfiction, when we elevate people in our own societies, when we put our heroes on a pedestal, then we are coming together. We
Mm-hmm.
feel less, I guess, solitary. We are part of the group.
Yeah.
We're not the only ones going through this, and in a way, it makes it a little bit easier. It makes it a little bit better, and it also shows that, like you said, you may not get the conclusion at the end of the story that that protagonist has got, but there is a conclusion to the
Yeah.
story. You don't ever get into storytelling and say Little Red Riding Hood way to grandma's house. She went to, excuse me, I'm so sorry. She went to, can you hear me now?
Yeah. We're good. We're good.
Okay. Little Red Riding Hood went to the woods to go to grandma's house. The end. That's not, the story never ends there. There's a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the conclusion? Where does the end point come? And if I don't like that end point, what can I modify to change the end point?
Mm-hmm. It can be very empowering when you start thinking about things in those terms. And before I get into my next thing, Marcus is giving us some love, complimenting us on making some good points. So thank you to Marcus. Oh gosh. Okay. Okay. Wait a minute. I have cough drop brain. Okay. Where was I going? But gosh, where was I going? Oh dear. Georgia, help me. My brain just went. Ah, do we still have Georgia, or is she? Okay, I think I see you. I'm not sure if you're having technical issues or not. Oh no, I can't hear you.
Okay, there we go. Better. I
Okay,
could
there we
not
are.
hear you.
Oh no.
Side note, Georgia has been experiencing some very severe technical difficulties with their internet providers for rural areas. In case nobody knew, I'm out in the country, so we got a very select internet provider service. Well, somebody cut the wires. I don't know what happened, but the wires were cut, and we have been without internet and phone service, well, for about 12, 13 hours yesterday, and now today we're kind of running in and out of the same problem. So I apologize. I had missed everything that you said after my story, but we're connected again. I'm sorry.
Oh, don't worry about it. I was actually losing my train of thought, but as you were talking, it came back to me because I wanted to weave into when we see, whether it's the gods of mythology or some of our favorite characters, when we see them go through their hurdles, especially if they are having to do things to get around those hurdles that they really don't want to do. Like the story I told last night of, Thor's hammer is gone. Now he has to go to Jotunheim, dressed up in a bride, pretend that he's Freya, and be able to get back his hammer through trickery. Not Thor's way of wanting to do business. And just the thought of this, this powerful, mighty god, this epitome of masculinity to the nth degree, in a veil and a pretty little dress. I mean, it's comic, but I think it also teaches that even if you are very powerful physically, even if you are a very direct, forthright person, there may be times in your life when, in order to solve the problem, your dignity might be somewhat temporarily compromised. And that's not
Yes.
fun. It's not fun. But I mean, we have to learn that lesson because no one is getting through this life without embarrassment. Not nobody. I don't care who you
No.
are.
But and again, after we started talking about that, the group kind of came to the conclusion as well that if we had a life without consequence or a life without strife, what exactly are you living for? If
Yeah.
you're always winning the fight, if you don't have any type of issues whatsoever, you walk into the bank and you say, I want $1 million, and they're like, here. And you go and you say, I don't want to pay for this car. Can I just drive it off the lot? And they're like, yeah. It's like, that gets boring really fast. That doesn't keep anybody's attention. It doesn't have a purpose. It's just like, I don't see the point in that. And that's, I, I don't think something that can survive very long.
Well,
And
I
we're
mean,
seeing how long, I think.
yeah. Well, I mean, that very idea was actually explored in the Matrix movies. I forget which one it was, but the main character was talking to one of the beings within I guess, the machine itself, and he said, originally we created this beautiful world for you. Everything was going your way all the time. It was peaceful, tranquil, prosperous, happiness. But he said that humans were rejecting it. They did not believe it, and they were having problems, and so they introduced a little bit of conflict into it. And I thought that is very, very interesting, because that is so us. We want to strive, we want to conquer in some fashion, whether it is something very mundane, if I am getting that stain out of this shirt, if it is the last thing I do on earth, or if it is the literal climbing of a mountain. Whatever it is, we want to prove ourselves, and I don't think we just psychologically break down if we don't. And I'm getting a cough drop, so take it away.
No, that's 100% right. And, I think that is where progression actually starts to take hold, and where you start to see results from natural progress, because you start with an idea and you elaborate upon it, and everybody kind of gets to use that idea and put their 2 cents into it. So, like, we were talking about the evolution of stories and how it can be brought into the family fold, how it can be put on a social scale, why it's important to do these things, the impacts that it's going to have on future generations. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. So you're talking about all of these people impacting all these different stories, and being able to take it literally in any way, shape, or form that they want. And again, when you make it too easy, or you perpetuate the same idea over and over again, it becomes stale, it becomes stagnant, people lose interest. That's when you start to get really wild and crazy thoughts that pop into people's heads, I think, because we'll look at some of the alternative fan fiction for pop culture classics, such as Scooby-Doo,
Mm-hmm.
or Supernatural, or and any, take your pick, anyone, like Rugrats from the 90s. There's now all this dark alternative art to these bubblegum sugar pop type stories that people are like, no, 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 none of that is even natural, or it's too milk toast that we need to spice it up. And then you've got, like I said, like the abortion idea with the babies, and Velma's this, that, and the third. We're putting thoughts into characters' heads. We had an issue with the Wednesday Addams series now that I thought everybody was happy about that, but Miss Hannah actually told me that now they're coming after Tim Burton for his representation of his own character, because they assumed Wednesday to be a certain way. And it's like, well, there's adaptations of characters, and you can take stories and relate them back to yourself. But at what point do you have to stay true to the actual character? Where do you not get to break who and what that particular dynamic is about? Because as a writer, you will know that once you give your character a personality, they don't stray from that personality, because that's not real. We
Yeah.
don't fluctuate usually, save please. That's a whole nother conversation. But we don't fluctuate personalities like that. We don't just go in and out of, one day we're caring, cuddling people, and the next day we're evil, cold, heartless bitches.
Mm-hmm.
So that type of character dynamic would not work for a story, because what that person would go through, say it's a series, how do you justify behaviors from one type of person in one book, in one story, have the same exact characters in another if they're not defined by their personalities? At that point, then you just made up a brand new character and they're doing something completely off the wall. People seem to see stories in such a way that, oh, it's so abstract and you can just, kind of do whatever you want. But, it's a lot of thinking and brainstorming about how these characters are and should interact with each other, what the lesson, moral, or final idea of the story is going to be. And then you need your introduction, your rising action, your climactic point, your falling action, and how you come back to a constant. And that's your basic storyline model. And I think that we've gotten so far away from any of that and any type of basic structure that we're just yelling words and ideas at each other and just saying, oh, look at this goofy person. See this avatar? Ooh, it's cool. You can look at it. Yeah, great. Everybody raves about it and spends $1 million at the box office. And I can't comprehend the basic storyline. So that's where I'm at.
I mean, you're right. There has to be justification, especially if a character is doing something that seems like the opposite of what they are. And since you brought up Supernatural,
I love it.
Times. Oh, I do too. I'm in love with all three of them. I really am. But there were times when they were indeed acting out of character, but there was always a reason. If like the world is going to end if I do not do this thing, and this is my sacrifice, and I have to do it because I love my family. It always comes back to I love my family. Everything they do, good or bad, it always comes back to I love my family. Or if they're
except the last episode. Spoiler alert! Don't watch the last episode. I'm sorry. Okay, now I'm done.
Oh, I can't get past the Castiel's ending. That just broke my heart, and I couldn't take it. I cried. I mean, I see clips of it, and I still cry. It's that bad. Anyway, but whenever they were doing something that was truly the opposite of what they were under the influence of some other entity that was not who they were, and that's how you knew, because you knew the character wouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z if there wasn't an outside influence or immense outside pressure. So, I mean, in storytelling, you can get characters to very surprising places, but you have to have logic. You have to have things make sense. And I think sometimes if you go through that same process through our pagan mythologists of saying, okay, these are the events of the story. I don't understand them. You have to slow down, think about, okay, where are they at in this period of history with each other? What is the state of everyone's relationships? Who's done what to who at this juncture? What are everyone's interests? And once you start filling in those blanks and you start taking a more holistic view, it's like, okay, everything about this story makes absolute sense now. I understand why they're acting the way that they are. And when you are finding, yourself and challenging situations, I think you are more likely to go to that process of what do the other people involved with me in the situation have at stake? What are their motivations? And I think, people are always talking about how we need greater empathy and more human understanding. I'm like, well, clearly the methods we've been using to achieve that aren't working. What if we take this circuitous route? What if we use stories the way they were meant to be used to help us understand ourselves and other people? What about that?
Yeah, you know what? It is a lot easier to use a story to understand psychology than to read Freud or, try to dive into the finer points of ego and id and, psychological development stages. And not everybody is interested in that. But whenever you put a selfish individual into a fairy tale, a situation where there's consequences for an action, such as the boy who cried wolf, for example, it becomes a very basic story that you could tell a child and they can grasp very simply. If you continuously lie, then you are going to have negative consequences for a lie at one point or another. Now, you didn't have negative consequences in the first, second, or the third instance. It wasn't until that fourth instance that it really came back to bite you in the butt when nobody believed you anymore. So you can take more complex ideas or even happenings, because let's bring it back into the nonfiction realm and turn these big events. The Chicago, was it Chicago? No, it's Boston. I lied. The MLK statue.
Oh, yes.
That right there, we could have put that statue into better context with better storytelling about it, with better promotion around it. But no, they weren't focused on the story behind it. They were actually focused on revealing it and getting the pats on the back for look at what we did. And what does that then tell our children? So they don't get the impact of why the statue was erected. They don't really understand it because it's abstract modern art, and a lot of us adults don't even understand that. And then third, they completely have checked out of it by then and are going to just walk by it every day and just say, oh yeah, that's been there, since I was young. So there's no respect for anything. And again, you're breaking down the ability of people to connect at the heart of things at the end of the day, when you don't teach them those sorts of things on a level that is graspable to them.
Oh, I agree. And the fact that we're not able to connect through forms of storytelling, because even sculpture, if done properly, can tell a story, as you rightly point out. I mean, we could go, to an art museum, you and I. We could look at some paintings, and we might be struck by the same painting, but we might not see the same things in it. Well, we could sit down and have a conversation about it and just kind of appreciate, what each of us is bringing, and that would be a moment of great connection. I mean, there's a reason why, gentlemen, why you take the lady you're interested in to, art galleries or to the theater or things like that. It's because it opens people up, and you're able to form a more intimate connection, a much more emotional, intimate connection with people. And when you break that down and people they can't see anything, they can't connect it, they can't relate it back to their lives, they can't possibly put themselves in someone else's shoes. I mean, there's a huge problem. I mean, and this even ties into the work you and I both do with community building. It is very, very difficult to get people to, for one, give that a try, because everybody has their horror stories, including you and me. But there's also the issue of having to relearn how to talk to the other beings, because social media has taught us to just talk at each other, to not really ask each other, not take an interest in other people in any real way, but definitely keep track of who's taking an interest in you, and breaking down those patterns. I mean, this is a work of generations. There's
not
so
only
much
that,
to do.
But talking at each other, debating with each other, and trying to win an argument. I keep going back to that empathy point that you made earlier in the conversation, and how this actually works as an empathy exercise for other people. You're right. If you can't, we use these things to diagnose sociopaths, psychopaths, and other illnesses. If you can't empathize with another human being or another living creature, we tend to think that is a big red flag in our society. So now we're taking, like you said, the social media aspects and blowing it up, that we're not only talking at or over each other, but we pit ourselves against each other to where, okay, you and I have collaborated on a level that I've not seen very many contributors really pull off in a unique fashion. Tim Cass comes to mind. Steven Crowder comes to mind.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't believe that even the Daily Wire hits it like those two particular shows do, because they're separate in their entities and their individualities. When you go to like Chrissy Mayer's channel, and she does the girls on the late night chat, she has Lila Hart, She has a couple different female contributors, and they are actually co-sponsored by a comedy channel and one big comedy station that I can't remember the name of. I'm so sorry, but the collaborations on those levels are becoming so much bigger, so much more powerful, that they're not debating each other. You know, they're not agreeing on every point,
Right.
by any means of the situation, but they're not framing the dialogue such as ding ding ding, here in the left corner we have, you know, Michael Myers versus Jason. You know, like, they're not framing it in that level. It's literal conversation. Like, we come to the table every Thursday and just talk and spitball it out, and highly encourage people like this and that and Marcus and everybody else to put in you know, comments, because that is what this is about.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, this and that is right on the same wavelength with us. He says, have we lost the ability to be creative or expressive due to our disengagement in personal interactions? Are these results the true intention or manifestation of the government grooming? I mean, if it isn't their outright intention, I think they're delighted with the results. I think nothing would please them more. I mean, it certainly serves their interests because, you know, one of the other reasons we wanted to talk about storytelling is because many people have observed in the commentary fields that Americans do not have a sense of what our story is. And we need to be weaving together a new one, because the one that's being imposed upon us leads us to terrible places. I mean, not just happiness and unhappiness, not just poverty, not just, you know, complete civil disorder, but just hostility on a level that our generation has not experienced, not in the Western world. Not even
No.
close. And and we do need to figure out how to re-engage with one another, as this and that says, and on that real human level. And that's why every so often, if things get too heated in a debate and the Gilded Group, I kind of bring out my ruler and wrap the knuckles a little bit and said, you remember you're on the same side, right? You know, and here's the thing. I mean, we talk about a lot of different methodologies to try to address various problems. And the reality is, you know, maybe some of them would work, maybe none of them will work. Maybe we need to keep going. But we need to remember that our goal is to have a society in which we can exist peacefully. You know, preferably without, you know, having this constant, you know, will they or won't they start having a civil war in the next 5 minutes? I don't think that's been very good for us. But I mean,
No.
if we have to tell ourselves a different story, we have to believe different things about ourselves.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Not only are the stories being told about Americans most definitely inaccurate on many different levels, but I feel like a lot of us know it and don't agree with it, but don't do enough to stop it from happening. There's just that disconnect at that point where it's like, what do you mean? I have to do something? Oh man, like, I agree with you. I can give you my support, but when it comes to coming over that hump and doing with you, that's where we kind of get that cold feet. And I think, going back to what this and that said, that is exactly what the government wants. You can have your little ideas, you can have your little stories, you can teach your kids whatever, as long as at the end of the day, they don't kick it into that second gear and act upon those feelings.
Mm-hmm. I think that is a powerful lesson we need to be keeping in mind, because I think some people who are very honest, they tend to approach what's going on like, well, how can they keep doing this thing? Everyone is so unhappy about it. And I've been trying to very gently, and sometimes not so gently, introduce the idea of they do not care if you're happy or not. They only care of whether or not you're going to physically rebel.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
That is the only thing they are concerned about. I mean, you can, you know, talk behind their backs, real snide, blah, blah, blah. Boy, they're a bunch of rotten, horrible people. They don't care. They look
Nope.
down on you. They don't care what the ant thinks of them either.
Nope.
It's only if you're going to interfere with what they want to do that they begin to care. And that's why I think it's so useful to pay attention on who gets attacked and the manner in which they're attacked, because I'm like, somebody touched a nerve. They pose some sort of threat. So, what can we do to help them? I mean, that's kind of how I feel about Stephen Crowder, especially these days, because I'm just, how can I help you? How can little
Yes.
old me with my tiny little channel, what can I do to what can I put out in the ether that helps what you're doing? Because we were talking last night about him a little bit. He is like the head of a spear or the court jester, almost sometimes in equal measure. That is his natural role, and the role that he's being kind of forced into, you can tell he's not comfortable with it. So I'm thinking, what can the rest of us do who share a similar vision of the future, who want similar things, similar values? What can we do to, one, strengthen him and make his job a little bit easier, and create circumstances in which he's able to go back to the role in which he is comfortable with? Unless of course this is the next stage of his development, in which case we just need to help him support the process. I mean, you and I know all about that. I mean, how often have we
Oh, yeah.
said to the people, do you think this comes naturally to us? It doesn't. We got pushed.
But if it looks good, we'll take the compliment.
Yeah, we will. We definitely will. And I think that is where maybe we can start getting a little bit people into motion again, and realize that you might think that what you're doing won't make a difference. You might think that it's small, but it's making a difference to something. Like that parable of, the man saw a bunch of starfish washed up on the ocean shore, and he was tossing them back in the water. And someone said, it's not going to make a difference. You can't save them all. And he picked one up, tossed it back at the sea, and said it made a difference to that one. So, I mean, it
That
does.
is powerful.
Yeah, it does count. I mean, and that's something that's achievable. Just because you have achievable things you can do, it doesn't mean that it isn't having an impact. Because if we had 20 people in each community doing what they could to address some of these issues, that adds up pretty quickly. So, don't feel like you have to do the whole thing. Just do
No.
what you can.
And do what you're good at. I
Yeah.
think that is another thing that gets lost in storytelling, and why it's so important to narrow your characters down to a personality type and stick with it, because nobody is everything. I'm
No.
not the best at everything. That's not realistic. I have a role. I would like to stay in that lane. And when I'm forced to operate outside of it, yes, I can adapt, and yes, I can maneuver. And it is a stage of growth on a personal level, but it isn't comfortable, and it may not end up being something that is sustainable either, because you don't have to be good at everything you try. You don't have to. And I think that a lot of stories need to emphasize that. I think I would love to see more stories about people failing at things.
Yeah.
I tried this and I didn't like it. I tried that and I didn't like it. But what I found out is these two jobs had this in common. So I went, I did some research and found out that this was what I was really supposed to do. I would love to find more people out there who found something that they're like, yeah, it's a job. Every day it's a job. You got to get in, you got to put in work. I come home, I'm tired, but I like what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I would love to hear stories about that. And if we put that mojo into the atmosphere, we might actually see some positive results from it, because that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, and anyone who wants to join us in that task, please feel free to add your intentions to what we're doing. But I like that idea. I like the idea of having characters and also ourselves feeling our way into finding our roles, figuring out what it is we are meant to be doing, and to realize that, sometimes if we're not good at something, it isn't because we haven't sufficiently tried. It's because that's not what we are built for. That's not what we were intended to be doing. And there's other jobs who, we can learn competency. And we can get to the point where if we have to function, particularly in an emergency, we can. But what we also need is some stories in which people are willing to relinquish that role when someone who is suited arrives on the scene, and after they prove themselves, saying, I am handing this over to you because I can trust you. I mean, what about that? Stories in which there is trust that is built and trust that is rewarded in relationships. I mean, think about how different that would be if people were looking at the world in those terms.
Oh, we could go on for another hour and a
Yeah.
half with just creative plot points that have slacked throughout the years that haven't been explored to the fullest. Such new ideas that don't have to be antithetical to everything that we've ever known or ever done. Classic stories that could have new twists put onto them, that it becomes more relatable to the people of the 21st century. But we stifle those creative voices. We put them into situations where they must perform to the designated standard. Anything that colors outside of those lines ends up getting silenced. Like you said, whether or not you follow the mainstream agenda will determine whether or not you're deemed successful or unsuccessful. And we need to really start pulling away from the popularity contest that we force ourselves into, and start being more principled and just getting some self-satisfaction. And I think, again, that goes back to, curing a lot of psychological issues as well.
Well, and also that approach that's very compatible with community building. I mean, when we talk about community, we're not talking about subscribers. We're not counting noses. We're not even talking about the amount of people who come to the Gilded group. Although if you would like to visit us, you are, of course, most welcome. It's about who's actually talking to one another, who's getting acquainted, who's starting to see this as a place where you can exchange ideas, and where, oh, pardon me, where people, where they can discuss things, where they can say, oh, I've got this XYZ project, but I'm kind of stymied. And people try to work through them with it, even if it's just giving them moral support. I mean, actually functioning together. I'm sorry, guys. Functioning together in a meaningful way. That is actual community. That's where you are actually invested in other human beings. And I do think that we are starting to see the end of the road for, I got a massive audience, or I got these followers on Twitter and this and that. I mean, if that's all that you're after, okay, there's some formulas that can get you to where you want to go. If this is just about building a business for you, there are ways to make that financially successful for you. But is it actually accomplishing your what for? To borrow, outright steal the question you're always asking about what are you doing this for? I mean, we know what we're doing this for. We're wanting to meet people. We're wanting to collaborate with people. We're wanting to form community with people. And others, I'm just thinking, okay, I mean, congratulations on your numbers. I'm not really seeing any depth. I'm not seeing any, real substance there. I'm not seeing how people are connecting. And I think that's a problem. And I think people will find out over the long term that isn't really a satisfying way to go about this.
They're not connecting. They are amassing a trophy, in my genuine opinion. When you're first to look at the sales and distribution model, as opposed to, okay, what type of meaningful conversations are we going to have? Is this going to shift the culture that we all seem to have a problem with? Because when you're pulling all these people together, your first inclination is, oh, okay, well, we all think alike, right? So if we all think alike, and we know that we're not the problem, right? How then do we get ourselves into the issue that we're in? How then do we who's the question in 2020, who's voting for these people? Yeah. Who's voting for these instances? Okay, so then you've got to think, are there people amongst us who don't necessarily believe what we believe? Yeah. Are they infiltrators? Are they working against? Are they trying to destroy or stymie that next effort? Because, okay, like you said, we get together. We both pulled our channels up to about 200 plus subscribers from nothing. I've not paid for no subscribers, anybody's anything. Everything's been natural, organic, and I have a feeling yours is the same way.
Oh yeah.
So we get all these people together. What was your next step? It was to create the brew and actually give them a space to throw their ideas off of each other. Now we do the actual chats on a weekly basis where we can physically talk to each other, not only about things in Blackbird's Brew, but our own personal experiences, because we've built those relationships. And based off of what? Talking on the internet with each other, as opposed to arguing, fighting, trying to fight for subs. I mean, you were a little bit lower than my channel before I found you. We got you promoted. You've now skyrocketed past me, and I think it's amazing. I would never ever say that I was responsible for that or that I helped with that in any way, but I love to say that I can promote you. That's what I say, is that I have the opportunity to feature you, for you to feature me, and for us to collaborate. And I can't wait to get my laptop fixed so that we can do the live together, because those are the things that really mean something to us. And then once we collaborate, you guys all together, and we all really have a firm understanding, then we could start teaching others. Then we can really start putting that into play in our everyday lives. And then it's not, just us escaping to Blackbird's Brew to get away from the crazy people. We can actually escape into our communities and say we built that.
Which is the ultimate goal, to take what we're creating here and bring it outwards. And as far as your subscriber goes, I do not believe that YouTube is giving you an accurate count. I'm just tossing that. I think you still have more than me. They just don't want to admit to it. I guess you're a little further down on their naughty list than I am at the moment, but I'm working hard to change that. We're going to
yes, you are
together. We're going to do this.
But we've got Rumble back up. You've got the Odyssey back up. There's all different types of where there's a will, there's a way. And I think that goes back into the tenacity of just, being the type of individual who refuses to say no to their goals. That's all.
How's that?
Whatever the goal is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely the story that you and I tell each other every single day. If I'm going into battle and I'm telling them, no, I don't think that I will. And that is a powerful, motivating thing. And the last thing I want to bring up as far as storytelling goes is about, we've been told a certain story about what constitutes success. And we've kind of skirted around it a little bit. And I think we are starting to redefine that. And I think we are starting to encounter people who are also reconsidering what exactly that means, especially since, the financial sector is going pretty well out of control. None of us are going to be in the cushy situation we were in a few years ago. We've got some serious challenges on the horizon. So I think that people are going to become more open to the idea of defining success in a way that isn't necessarily about, I have X number of dollars in the bank, or, I have this, or, I could buy that. Which is a really shallow way to calculate your own worth, let alone let alone somebody else's. But I think we are moving into a different way. I think if we can start measuring success by saying, look at the people who I have around me that I care about and who actually care about me. My husband yesterday, he got some bad news about a relative who passed away. And I shared that in the brew this morning. And there was nothing but an outflowing of, love and support. And knowing that if I have to be absent for a while, everyone's going to simply, carry on in my absence, and it'll work out just fine. That's what you get when you are actually connecting with people. If we were just random people who were just kind of tossing content at each other, that wouldn't have been the reaction at all. It makes so much difference. We are needing that human connection. And since that seems to be what the powers that be want to deprive us of, I think anything that works towards that goal is an excellent act of rebellion. It's even legal. How about that?
Yes. It'll help get out that non-conformity in your system there. Everybody that wants to feel like they want to shake off the roles of the system. I think that's the best way to do it, is to actually learn the lesson they didn't want you to learn. And you summed it up perfectly. And that is your reputation, ultimately speaking. That is your connection with your neighbors, your family. You can amass a lot of things. And I know this is going to be so cliche, it's going to make so many people cringe, but you can't take it with you. At the end of the day, you just can't. And, we are of the persuasion that we're going to encounter each other again. Okay. So if we don't want to be at odds for eternity, then maybe through one of these lives we work our issues out.
Yeah. Oh, how's that for a thought to leave you with, gang? The person who
That's
you
right.
can't stand today, you're going to be doing that merry-go-round until you work something out. All
Trial
right.
and error, trial and error.
Oh boy. Tell you what, how's that food for thought? Oh, well, I think that's all I've got for the people today. Is there anything else you want to leave them with?
No, ma'am. I am just super excited for Marcus and this and that showing up, putting their meaningful thoughts on the table. Shout out to Druid Fox, who I just found
Yes.
out has a Twitter this morning.
Yes.
So get online, follow her and her cat. She's going to give Styx a run for his money. And she's got a little kitty kitty and a furry that she gave their own personality Twitter page to. So I was really excited to see that. And of course, we have Gandalf's email news list. If anybody wants to send their thoughts and their good vibes and energies for Gandalf, who also had a health issue himself,
Yeah.
we've all been pulling our energy and pushing towards him and his wife because they are really put through the ringer right now with the way that the healthcare system is set up, and it's just not a pleasant situation for anybody who has to go through those people. They're so rotten. But those are my little shout outs. Did I miss anybody?
No one who's currently active. We do have other content creators, but both of them are just kind of on sabbatical, one because of a work situation and the other because of some ongoing family issues. But Nocturnal Pagan and Sigrun Gregerson, mwah, mwah, mwah. We love you both. And whenever you guys are able to get back in the saddle, I mean, we absolutely cannot wait. So that's where we're at. That's where I guess where we'll leave it. There
That's all
is
we got.
It is. I've got a link for George's YouTube channel in the description box. I got a link to the Gilded group in the box. So absolutely come and visit us. And one last little thing. Yesterday, I completed the rough draft for an online ritual that I would like to present to the group to possibly do for Imulk and Charming of the Plows. So I figured it would be better to at least attempt to do ritual together, however awkwardly in the digital space, than to leave it undone. And maybe this could help kind of break the ice and get us, bring us another level of community. So stay tuned for more updates on that, gang. And
join the brew.
join the brew, and you can be part of it all. All righty. Bye-bye, everybody.